This week's Torah portion is the Torah portion of Akev, which in Hebrew means because. It's found in Deuteronomy chapter 7. It begins Moses telling Jewish people that because you listen to the word of God, and because you will do the commandments of God given in the Torah, that you will prosper in the land that you are about to conquer, the land of Israel, and you will settle there, fulfilling the prophecy that God gave to the forefathers of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. On a little bit of a different tone, Moses also adds in some rebuke. Classic Jewish style. Whenever you give a compliment, you gotta add in some rebuke. I'm kidding, that was a joke. So what was the rebuke from Moses? He reminds them about the golden calf. When God gave the 10 commandments to the Jewish people, Moses came down with the 2 tablets and he saw the Jewish people serving a golden calf that they made. And they put in some parchment and the calf was moving and talking, which essentially is idol worship, because they miscalculated on the days when Moses was supposed to come back down. And Moses broke the 2 tablets. God actually told him, thank you for breaking the 2 tablets. It's almost like if you make a business deal and one partner doesn't keep the business deal and someone rips up the contract, so there was no business deal, there's no contract, I'm sorry, you can't do anything. So Moses was kind of protecting the Jewish people. He was saying, I broke the tablets. They served idols, which is a no-no in the 10 commandments, but I broke the 10 commandments, so it's as if there was no proof. And obviously by God's grace for forgiving the Jewish people and Moses pleading for the Jewish people, we got the second set of the tablets, the 10 commandments. And that's a story unto itself, but Moses is just reminding the Jews of what happened. He reminds them of the rebellion of the cousin of Moses, Korah, that many people went along with, and they were questioning the authority of Moses and Aaron, and they didn't in general think authority was necessary. They thought only thing was necessary was to do the commandments and serve God in the physical world. And they were mistaken, because although that is important, there still needs to be a certain system and a certain humility and a certain education and growth stage. And they didn't really comprehend how the two can fit. How could it be that the only thing that's important is to elevate the world? So who cares how much knowledge you have? That's not important. They didn't understand how there can be the finished product, but it had to be infused with the proper intentions, with the proper, where is it coming from, the proper path and the proper channel. So Moses reminds him of that. He's basically reminding him of the shortcomings. He reminds, and keep in mind, this is 40 years of shortcomings. So if you have an argument with your spouse and they say, well, you remember last week you said this and this. Moses is saying 40 years ago, do you remember what happened with the golden calf? So he's really pulling up a hard one on them. And he says, you remember the sin of the spies that I sent to Israel? They came back to the Jewish people frightened and scaring everybody, saying there's giants in Israel. We will never stand a chance to them. And the Jews said, you know what? We don't want to go to Israel. And they didn't believe in God, that God would help them in their battle to conquer Israel. So he reminds them of that. He reminds them of a few other instances where the Jews upset God. And he says to the Jewish people, Moses says to the Jewish people, since I knew you guys, you've been doing stuff to upset God. But he also says that God has tremendous forgiveness and he forgives your sins. And the second tablets that he gave you was a sign that he forgives you, and he still wants you to be serving him, and he still wants you to bring down his holiness into the world. he also reminds them for 40 years in the desert, there was manna, special bread coming down from the heaven to sustain them. And the reason for that manna was coming down from the heaven to sustain them, not in another way, was to teach them an important lesson. That man does not just live on bread, but on the utterance of God's mouth, which creates sustenance for man. And this is an important lesson, not just for the Jews that time in the desert, but I think for all humanity and until, for eternity, until the coming of Mashiach, until we have no evil in the world, which is that don't get carried away. And this is a theme that Moses is telling them later on also. Do not think that, God created the world and now there's a world, and if you're going to go find, sustenance and bread and you're going to keep yourself alive, that is not the case. God decided that he will create bread to give you sustenance, but it's coming from the power of God, which is giving you sustenance, not just the bread. So don't get carried away by thinking the bread makes you live. It's really the life force which God infuses in the bread which makes you live. And we saw that clearly when the bread came down from heaven to give the Jews sustenance, as opposed from the ground or some sheep walking by. So we were clearly able to see it's not the bread, it's what's behind the bread, giving life force to the bread, whether it comes from the sky or whether it comes from the earth. That's what gives us life. And to have that principle straight and not to be sidetracked keeps us in check. So that was an important lesson that God specifically wanted to bring down the manna from heaven. And it also gives a little bit more meaning, to the situation. Why did God decide? There was no just by accident or random, or that was the only thing in stock. There was no anything else in stock, in God's stock. What did he have? He had raining down bread from the heaven. No, it was designed specifically. Which also teaches us that things in our life that seem random are actually designed by God himself, specifically. And we can learn a lesson if we choose to. Which is so beautiful about everything that happens in life is that we have our own perceptions. We can choose to be bitter, we can choose to be stronger, we can choose to be happy, we can choose to be sad. We can choose on what we focus on. So that's something beautiful that the Jews learned in the desert. Moses describes the land that they're bound to enter, the land of Israel, the chosen land, the promised land, as a land flowing with milk and honey, basically delicacies, basically sweetness and nutrition. He says it's a land blessed with 7 special types of food: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and dates. These are all sweet foods, staple foods, and luxury foods from the ground. Obviously, that's, the cattle is something different. In addition, Moses says this is the land where God, it's the apple of God's eye. He's constantly focused the entire year on Israel and the well-being of Israel. Moses gives directions to the Jewish people when they enter the land of Israel to destroy the idols from the previous nations that inhabited the land. And again reminds them that they should not become egotistical or haughty and start getting sidetracked and believing that they got their own wealth and whatever they accomplish is their own achievement. They should remember and have humility and remember that it's all blessing from God, that they were successful or that they will be successful, and to remain grateful. And to remain grateful for that. Another very important portion in this week's Torah portion, we have the second chapter of the Shema, which is very beautiful and reiterates a lot of fundamental commandments. And it also describes about fulfilling the commandments can lead to results of blessing and prosperity. And the opposite can lead us to the opposite of prosperity. It also has a beautiful source for prayer, that whenever a Jew needs something, he has a special opportunity and commandment to pray to God. Obviously, people pray for different things at different times. Later on, the rabbis set up specific prayers, specific language of prayer, and specific times for prayer. But in all of these prayers, there is special places where it's just ask God for what you want. In addition to when you need to ask God for a prayer, obviously we have the famous book of Psalms, which was written by King David, which is meant for a person anytime he's feeling in need or anytime he wants to make special prayers to God and connect. He can just recite the Psalms, and they're beautiful Psalms. And there's so many different Psalms talking about so many different aspects of human life, the ups and the downs, to be grateful, to sing praises to God, as well as asking God for help and asking God for blessing. And also in this portion has special references to the resurrection of the dead in the Messianic age. Obviously, the Messianic age, according to Judaism, is when we're going to have the third temple come down from God in Jerusalem. It's going to be a time when there will be no more war, there will be no evil, there will be no sickness. And in addition, we believe in Judaism that after the Messianic age starts, there will be the resurrection of the dead. And all of the people who have deceased from this world will come back to life and join us in the Messianic age, in the times of Mashiach, where we will serve God and the entire world will be able to see godliness and use all of our resources to serve God with happiness, with joy, and with true connection to God. And that's something beautiful. What more can we ask for? Obviously, now we're standing in a time where there's still evil in the world, there's still death in the world, there's still sickness in the world, and there's still ego in the world. And now, obviously, we yearn for those better times, but now our job is to do whatever we can do to bring the world towards that place of perfection, of ultimate kindness and goodness. So now is the time of the journey where it's our responsibility and job to do what we can. There will be another time where that won't be our responsibility. Our responsibility will be something else. Now our responsibility is doing what we can do to make the world a better place, doing what we can do to strengthen our belief in God and to help our friends and family strengthen their belief in God, to know where life comes from and to stay focused on that and not get sidetracked. There's many ways to get sidetracked, in sadness and in ego. There's two sides of the same coin. But when we stand strong and we show God that so many years later, in exile, we still are trying to stay close to Him and still are trying to observe His commandments to the best of our capabilities, to the best of our knowledge, and still trying to grow in our connection to God and being a light into the world, we're showing God that even though it's so many years later and we've been through so many difficulties, there is no one like the Jewish people that will do whatever it takes to stand united and stand strong. And in that alone may we merit the coming of the Messianic age, the coming of Mashiach, where there will be no more evil in the world. Thank you for listening, everyone, and have a wonderful week.